This is the Franchise QB Podcast, where we empower entrepreneurs to win big in franchising. We huddle up weekly to educate our audience about the most successful small business model ever created, franchising.
Welcome to the Franchise QB Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Halpern, a 20-year industry veteran and entrepreneur. My mission is for listeners to achieve their American dreams of creating wealth and independence through franchise ownership. Every week, we speak with franchisees, franchisors, or vendors that support the industry. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Joining us in the huddle today is Rob Palmer, founder and brand president at Lawn Squad. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Appreciate it. Enjoy being on. Look forward to the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes of conversation.
Awesome. So before we get into your franchise company, Lawn Squad, let's learn about your background in the lawn care industry. You were a sales rep way back in the day in the supply space in the late 90s, and then you went on to found the company Weed Pro in Ohio back in 2001, which happens to be when I started my career in franchising. So 20 years later, you continue to service Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. How did you initially get into the sales side of the lawn and landscape industry, and what inspired you to make that leap into entrepreneurship and start your own business?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny. I would start by saying I didn't really expect to even be in the lawn business. I had going to college all along thinking I was going to continue on and going to law school. And as it so happens, college kids build debt. Figured, maybe I'll take a couple of years off, get a job, start working. And it just so happens that in Northeast Ohio, really the largest supplier to the lawn and landscape industry was started right here, a company called Lesco. And it just so happens that I was at a deli and talking about looking for a job, and a gentleman comes up to me and mentions, "Hey, you're looking for a job?" And I didn't know the guy at the time, but he actually was the owner of Lesco, who at the time was probably a $400 million company.
Good thing you went to that deli.
Yeah, it was a great deli. It was a great sandwich, too. But yeah, as it turns out, I went to work for Lesco. And the beauty of that was because this was their headquarters here in Rocky River, Ohio, I had access to all the PhDs, all the original founders of that company who really invented a lot of the technologies that are still being used on coated slow-release fertilizers, all the different control products. And while I worked there for that particular location for 2 years, it was like getting a master's degree in agronomy and having full and complete access to all the research, the data, all the innovation that was happening basically right around me. I really began to fall in love with the lawn care space. And so while it wasn't something I was planning on, it worked out. I eventually continued to just move up with the company to a local salesman in one of their service centers, to one of their branch managers in a service center, to eventually becoming a market sales rep covering basically the entire state of Ohio. And what was interesting is during that time, I was learning lawn care in all the facets of it at the same time, meeting customers, trying to understand their challenges. I was a commission salesperson, so clearly I wanted them to grow their businesses because the more I could sell them, the more money I could make.
Sure.
And I really started attending, it was in the late 90s, I started attending a lot of the state and national lawn care conferences. And again, probably my love for the industry really started to grow because I started to see I wasn't just one, I was one of 10,000 at a lot of these conventions, going to the trade shows, taking a lot of the classes on marketing and sales and operations and finance. And I was doing so because I figured, well, I'm going to bring this information back to my customer base. If I can offer them some help in growing their business, then they may be a little less, price sensitive towards me. And if I can help them grow their business, I'm going to sell them more materials and hence make more commission. Yeah. I did that for a couple of years, and I felt like I was banging my head against the wall a little bit because I wasn't seeing the growth that I was kind of hoping to have from those customers. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this on my own. And timing couldn't have been worse. My wife was pregnant. She was a school teacher, and we had always planned on her staying home with our kids. And in that same year, I left a salaried position with good commission. She left her teaching job, and we lived off our savings while I started Weed Pro in 2001 from 0 customers on day one to just before selling the company in April of 2023 to servicing.
Well, I'm glad you shared that with us because a lot of people listening might be at that inflection point in their career thinking, wow, I mean, you've done it, right? You took that entrepreneurial leap, you took a big risk. You and I have that in common in that I worked for someone for 5 years in the franchising space to really understand the model with a franchise sales organization. And my oldest son, Jackson, was born in 2006, and that's when I hung my own shingle and decided to become a franchise consultant. So I remember those times I had another mouth to feed, and I just kind of said bye to the salary and hello to entrepreneurship. And, that's a little scary, but I, kind of channel that emotion to kind of discuss, what my candidates are going through as they contemplate the same kind of choice for their future.
It's right. I mean, one thing I've kind of really taken to heart in this endeavor is, for the last 23 years, I was spending my own money, right? And I really wanted the value of that dollar to go as far as it could, whether it's in marketing or sales, overhead, et cetera. So, I take it very personally and very passionately that I want each of these franchises that we're bringing on to understand that and to know that. And I want the value of that dollar to go as far as it can for them as well, because, during those years, it was eating a lot more bologna at the time. And, I don't want them to go through some of those things that we went through. And really, that's kind of what I found is the beauty with this whole franchising game is my pain equals their gain. Yep. And it drives me. It's really the passion that is propelling me forward in this new venture, because I feel like we can take all the lessons learned and apply those so that future franchises don't make the same mistakes that we made during those 23 years of trial and error, of A/B testing, of making some mistakes and knowing really the best way to utilize every single dollar.
Yeah, I think the way to sum that up is decades into days. One of my colleagues, Brian Beers, that I work with, says decades into days. So you're taking all that knowledge that you created from 2001 to 23, and you're handing it on a silver platter over to a franchise owner that gets to skip a lot of those hardships that you face kind of building up the company. So I think that's where the value proposition comes in with franchising. So you had mentioned that in the late 90s you were working for this company, and then in 2001 you decided. So how many years were you kind of doing the corporate thing before you jumped over and started your own deal?
I was with Lesco for about five years prior to starting WeedPro. But in the lessons learned, I mean, I can remember those were the years when Outlook was first coming out, and we were learning email, and Google really didn't exist at that point. It was other search engines. So I look back now and I realize, wow, I mean, it was really during those first 4 or 5 years when this macro economy really started excelling. So in some ways, I feel fortunate that we started at a good time from a technology standpoint, because, I'm not as young as I used to be, but I did start this business really in the technology era. So I've had to embrace that. And I think that really has been kind of fundamental to our success, is really embracing technology and using all aspects of it to leverage and scale our business.
Yeah, that sounds cool. So you mentioned in 2023 you sold the business to Authority Brands. So you've been in it 20 years. You catch the attention of Authority Brands, which is for those that don't know, a leading portfolio company that specializes in the home services space. So the acquisition happens in 23. And through that acquisition, WeedPro is now rebranded as Lawn Squad, which has found a lot of early momentum, and it's now expanding across the country. I know you're in the early stage of that. So why did you select Authority Brands as your partner when you were looking for your exit? And tell us about your experience so far working with them to kind of bring Lawn Squad into like a franchise model.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about going back to almost really late 22. My expectation wasn't to sell the business. We over the years we continued to expand. Obviously, starting in Cleveland, Ohio, eventually growing and expanding about 2 hours south to the middle of our state, to our state capital, Columbus, Ohio, and eventually we took that growth and we continued to go further south down in Ohio into Cincinnati, Ohio, which really are the 3 biggest markets in the state of Ohio. And it really opened the opportunity up to continued growth. And as I said, I really have stayed involved from those early days with national conventions, state conventions, and I found myself doing a little bit of consulting for other lawn care companies throughout the country. And ironically, the consulting was paying dividends for a lot of these companies. So it really opened my mind to continue to think about, you know what, why don't we take this, Weed Pro, the brand we currently have, and let's start talking about from a regional perspective outside of Ohio and maybe eventually a national. And, honestly, we had found a lot of success. We were doing really well. By really all measurables, we were doing extremely well. And I just got to the point where I'm thinking, I don't really have those resources, really even some of the know-how in that world. What I'm an expert in is building and growing a business. Wasn't necessarily an expert in franchising. And so one afternoon, I like it happens so many times, I got a call from a gentleman from Authority Brands. And, I went through about a 20-minute conversation, and I stopped the conversation. I said, now you realize we're not a franchise, right? And he said, yeah, we get that. Some of the preliminary information, what we've heard, some of our research shows us that this is worth more of a consideration for us. So they came into town. We kind of gave them a tour of the facility, gave them a tour of our systems, the processes we had. And I'll never forget the CEO of Authority Brands, Craig Donaldson, said, you are a franchise. We can clone this. You have built out in detail so many of the structures in place in finance and operations and sales and marketing. You just don't realize you're a franchise. Yeah. And, I thought about it through the weekend, and a week later, we started full due diligence, and fast forward to the end of March, beginning of April of last year, we signed a deal. And I could not be more happy. I went to dinner with a group of business owners, some of whom had sold their businesses, others who are in the process, and they asked me the question, all right, it's been about a year. Are you happy? And I said, I am elated. It was the best thing that I've ever done to really get a chance to work with some extremely smart people, some people that care about people, and learn from them and figure out a way to scale this thing into a national footprint. So I can tell you, I am extremely excited to be part of the Authority Brands family.
Yeah, no, they're a great company. Thanks for sharing that kind of journey with us. And I was in Columbia, Maryland at their headquarters about a year and a half ago, and I met with Craig. He talked a lot about the portfolio and the vision for the future, and this was obviously prior to Lawn Squad coming on board. And I met with one of your colleagues, a sister brand, Dry Medic, in the restoration space. I met Dominic and his team, and Carlos and Ben, and very similar story. I mean, Authority Brands is looking for the best and brightest in kind of verticals they're not in, and I'm glad that this thing's gone well for you so far, because they are a great partner, and I like to do business with them, so I'm glad you're part of the team now. So let's talk about the kind of evolution of the concept. The first couple of franchisees are obviously extremely important as you build the foundation for the future. Lawn Squad has signed its first two owners that are in Aurora, Illinois, and Dublin, Georgia. Tell us about Tim and John. Tell us about your first two guys, and how they got involved. Are they building these from scratch? Are they conversions? What's the deal with those guys?
Yeah, so ironic, about back in 2012, I started a peer group among lawn care companies from around the country. At first, there was a few landscapers in it, but it eventually turned into be more lawn care guys. And actually, one of the guys in that peer group back in, I think, 2010, like I said, was a gentleman named Tim Lake, who had a landscape business in Dublin, Georgia. And ironically, when I was going through this process with Authority Brands, I went and visited American Swimming Pools and Mosquito Squad's location, which is in Macon, Georgia. And so while I was in the area, I called up Tim and I said, Tim, I'm considering this new venture. And he made the comment to me. We went to breakfast that morning. He goes, well, hey, if you're going to do this, I want to be one of your first franchises. And that's awesome. I tell you, a year later, he signed a deal to be, I don't know if he was number one or number two technically, but because they both happened basically back to back. But, he was running a landscape company, really, really, really profitable, really well-run landscape company in Dublin and Macon, Georgia. But they didn't offer lawn care. So, it's a natural bolt-on for him to now go ahead and market and solicit to not only his existing customers, but to the greater Macon and Dublin, Georgia. So really excited. He's got a tremendous business acumen, got a phenomenal reputation, and I really couldn't ask for Tim to be one of our first franchises. And onto that, when I was with Authority Brands, we hosted a webinar among some of the existing brands, and I remember from that webinar, some of the questions I was getting through that webinar was coming from a guy named John Gerritsen, a guy who owned a cleaning authority brand within Authority Brands. Asking a lot of great questions. Got a phone call from him 2 days later asking, "Hey, can I come out to your location?" Comes out to the location and it tells us, "Hey, I'm in. Where do I sign?" I'm like, "Well, that's not how this process works, but let me get you in contact with our franchise business developer Mike Perez." And just a few short months later, he signed up. And really, it was a whirlwind because we've actually signed up 3 or 4 more since that time as well. And the seasonality of this business works so that you can start spring, summer, fall, winter. And so, getting them signed up when they did allowed them to get really a full year under their belt. And they're all launched. They're all out producing revenue right now. We're hosting weekly calls to them, continuing with our webinars. And so, getting these first 3 or 4 has really been kind of an amazing journey. And really looking forward.
It's just so cool that how, like, a guy that owns an independent business but connects with you through a peer network ends up converting his established business because he wanted that bolt-on that was a really good revenue driver for him. He obviously trusted you. He wanted to kind of be a part of what you're doing. That's great. And then you get another guy who's a seasoned franchise owner with their flagship concept, the cleaning authority, and he's looking to diversify, and he picks it makes sense. It's natural. It's like another, get to use all the shared services, the shared team, but diversify into another, revenue stream with the Lawn Squad. So I'd love to hear that. That's really neat.
Yeah, I'm really excited for both of these guys. And really, we've got a branch that's launching in southeastern Massachusetts, one in Cincinnati and northern Kentucky. And to date, it's been really an exciting opportunity. Like I said, I think back to the first 4 years I was in business, right? And as I said, at that time, there really wasn't as much going on with Google, internet, SEO, paid social, Facebook, etc. So it's been great to kind of build into this whole process how to ramp them, how to launch them and how to ramp them. And really, we're following a lot of the same playbook that I followed. And it's interesting, within our FDD, you can actually see through our item 19, the ramp process that our corporate now owned locations, which were my Cleveland and Columbus branches, how they performed in those first 4 years, and to see, 50%, 40%, 30% growth in those first 4 years and surpassing $1 million in that same time frame. That's the goal, and that's what we're working with between the additional marketing that is now available that wasn't available back then, working with kind of the experts at Authority Brands within their robust marketing department, and applying all the new technologies. It's it's not often you get a chance to kind of rewind and go back, and that's the opportunity I have now is to use all those best practices and all those days to decades that you mentioned, and reapply those to see the first 4 years now being applied by these new franchise owners within our system. So I'm very.
It's kind of neat to see them kind of skip a lot of the hard part of the startup and kind of accelerate to those growth phase because they have all these tools and technology and support and people. It's got to be pretty satisfying for you to see, okay, we got all our systems buttoned up. Let's see what happens when we place a new owner in this system. And you're seeing a lot of early success, which is great. So let's talk about revenue streams in terms of what Lawn Squad does. Like if you're an owner, what type of revenue streams do you have in this model?
So it's a great question. We, Lawn Squad is a lawn fertilization weed control company. We're the type of service that is hired to come in, apply the nutrition to the lawn to establish a stronger, healthier growth, control all the broadleaf weeds, really to improve the American dream, right? That front lawn with the white picket fence. It's our job to make sure that those lawns are healthy. So along with the fertilization, we offer core aeration, insect and weed control, overseeding, and then there's a lot of additional services such as liquid aerations, and so you look at the cycle of the business from spring through almost late winter. There's applications that are seasonally timed so that we have a reoccurring business model where every 35 days or so we're out doing the next round of applications, and season to season as all this revenue just reoccurs, which gives you the chance to kind of build upon year over year that allows kind of that ramp process to continue to grow. So, the core of our business, to this day remains lawn care fertilization, and we're expanding into plant health care, treating plant material to make sure they're healthy and green and growing, as well as perimeter pest control, which is a foundation spray around the outside of the house to continue stop those insects and ants and spiders from getting into the foundation. So we've got really the three core pillars: lawn care, plant health care, and perimeter pest control, all services that we've been performing for 23 years for thousands of customers.
Yeah. So is the assumption that a new owner would start in residential because they're kind of lower ticket, and then they'll build relationships in their community so they can attack some commercial jobs once they have the right team and the right equipment and the right know-how? Is that the natural progression?
It really is. I mean, we started out being primarily, a residential lawn care company, and as those trucks start getting on the road, it becomes easier and easier to be identified by homeowners associations, local businesses, local cities, and school districts. And so at this point, even in our corporate stores, our business is probably still 80% residential, but that 20% of commercial really adds up, and it's a nice addition to kind of round out the profit centers that we have, so that we've got the three core areas, and now we've got residential and commercial clients that we're calling upon every day.
Yeah. And you mentioned that recurring revenue model. That seems to be one of the first things that most candidates talk about, is like they'll trade high ticket for frequency when it comes to the recurring revenue, because it's predictable, it's a needs-based service. So that checks boxes for a lot of candidates that, are making this leap and want something where they can build their client base and have that predictable revenue. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what the team looks like and what the equipment looks like. When you launch, how many pieces of equipment do you need, and what does the initial team look like for a new owner?
It's a great question. We obviously, during that period of time from when we sold to Authority Brands to the time we actually received our FTD and began the process of selling franchises, we went through great pains to evaluate all the pieces of equipment, the vehicles, and all the operational requirements that were needed to launch this franchise. And so that's what we've basically done at this point. Each of these franchises that we've brought on board, we've been able to obviously work with them specifically. They've ordered the materials that we've required of them. And you mentioned recurring revenue. The other portion of this business that I like is these are one-man self-contained units that typically are going out on the road. We're using a Dodge ProMaster 3500. These vans are capable of producing significant revenue daily and yearly. And they're one-man vehicles. So what we have found is that over time, the equipment costs, while there's the upfront expense of getting into that van and into the ride-on sprayer equipment, the amount of revenue that a single van can produce over the period of a year has allowed them so that labor isn't as big of an issue, because in different industries within the green industry, a guy pulling a truck and a trailer mowing may have two guys in a truck and 3 or 4 mowers on that thing. In the lawn care space, what's nice is it's one guy in a truck with his ride-on equipment doing probably double the amount of revenue in a course of a year, because it's a specialized service. And so it really lends itself to really nice profits.
Yeah, and also just having that one employee, just overall, when you scale it, the labor model is going to be a lot more attractive. It's going to lead to higher margins and easier to operate the businesses and owners. That's pretty interesting. Sure. That one guy in the branded truck can kind of provide a lot of these service offerings. Yep. So let's talk about the launch and the ramp up. A new owner comes in, they're approved, they like this model, they're ready to go. How long does it take to get through training and launch the business? And if you could touch on the training program, that'd be great.
Yeah, we've gone to great lengths because we've, having done this 23 years, we take a lot of passion in it, right? We want to do it right. And so, throughout the course of that onboarding process, from the time they sign to the time they're launching, is typically about a 12-week process. And during that time, what we have found is we've put together a good 8 weeks of virtual training. 3 of those weeks are really self-paced, going through the LMS system, studying the materials that we've put in there, taking the quizzes. And really those quizzes are just in there to help guide where we may want to focus on specific areas with specific franchises. After those 3 weeks, we go into the next 5 weeks of of instructor-led training, 3 times a week with those folks. Throughout this entire process, our onboarding team is working with them, obviously, to make sure that all the business factors are being taken care of, as far as acquiring the vehicle, acquiring the equipment, looking at the state licensing that's required, because every state requires a technician to have an applicator's license so that they're out there doing the work the proper way. We all our study material through the onboarding process is really applicable for most of the states' testing requirements. So by the time they get through those 8 weeks, most of the time they've already contacted the state governing body, figured out when the testing sites are. They go and get tested. So usually by that time is when we begin our in-person training. We have them all come to our facility here. We go through 1 week of really an intense lawn care training program that's going to touch on everything from the agronomics to the financials, the operations, and the business software. We're very fortunate that within the lawn care space, there's a fantastic software program that has probably a good 75% market share that I've been using for 23 years. And it's really a phenomenal program. So we go through all the software training as well. And really by the time they get to the end of that week, they can, by the time they get back home, they're ready to get in that truck and start producing revenue. So, sometimes I think maybe it's 12 weeks too long. Is it too short? Obviously we're going to tweak that and figure that out. Yeah. But I think it's just about right.
Cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm assuming that's in Cleveland, or is it somewhere else in Ohio?
Yeah, it's in Cleveland. And, the beauty of that for us is we've because we have our corporate staff here, right? The intense training that they can ride along with technicians in the field, seeing exactly how they do the work. So it really brings a lot of additional opportunities in training because they can see real live situations. And it doesn't have to be theoretical all the time. So during that 1 week they're here, they're spending a full day with the actual field production, going through a day in the life of a technician.
That's great. So let's talk about who's the ideal candidate to become a Lawn Squad franchise owner. Who are you looking for?
That's one of the things that I've learned in the last year is it's so wide open, really. I mean, I clearly the low-hanging fruit are folks that are looking for conversion opportunities, that have some experience in the green industry, whether it's landscaping, pest control, or lawn care. Clearly, they have some idea of what the job requires. But really, it's amazing to me the attention we've been getting from all walks of life, really. Folks coming out of the corporate world, folks working a union job who want to transition to their next career life opportunity. I think it's got to be someone who has a passion for working, for being outside, who understands the elements outside at times, but is willing to kind of take on that extra responsibility and build and grow a business, something that they can be proud of. And really, a lot of them talk about legacy, being able to pass it down to their kids. And so I think someone that's forward thinking, someone that maybe has a little bit of business background and really just appreciates being outdoors. So at this point, I couldn't narrow it down to probably one particular category because thus far we've basically run the gamut.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thanks for sharing that with us. So just recap with me. How many Lawn Squad territories are open and onboarding? You got the 3 corporate, you've got 2 franchisees. How many territories do those 2 franchisees account for?
So those 2 franchisees, one bought 3 territories, the other bought just a single territory. Gotcha. But we actually have 3 more that have been launched now that each own 2 territories. The Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky franchise, the Southeastern Massachusetts owns 3 territories, and Dublin, Georgia, and that's it. Those are the ones.
Yeah, no, and also geographically, it's nice that they're operating in different climates so that the franchisees have, Atlanta's not the same as Massachusetts or Boston, so that's kind of neat that you have a good geographic spread out of the gate. And I mean, look, this is the beginning. You're just scratching the surface here, taking this proven model. And I love emerging franchise systems. So it's really cool that there's a lot of white space for new owners to come in and secure a nice swath of territory and kind of, piggyback off all the success you've had with your business and kind of parlay it into their own franchise. So that's cool. I know we've talked a lot about the model. Anything else that you want to share with us before we wrap up today?
I think I looked through this whole journey that I've been on, and I realized that it gives me an opportunity, like I said, to really take those 23 years and, if I can, extend that to the next generation of lawn care, because I've been very active in my state lawn care associations and the national lawn care associations. I've been on over 180 or so different site visits to lawn care companies throughout the country and Canada's on top of that. I think it's just a matter of trying to, find that happy medium and realize there's an opportunity out there for folks to, if they're looking for a franchise, they like being in the outdoors, and to have the support of a group of 23 years of experience backed by a group of Authority Brands who's really got their entire business based around home services. So I'm really excited for this venture. I appreciate being on today, and I look forward to continuing to watch your podcast in the future.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And one last question I forgot to ask you was, what does it cost for a new owner to get in the Lawn Squad in item 7? What's kind of our range to get started?
Yeah, no, the franchise fee is $45,000, but it's a pretty large territory, 100,000 single-family dwelling units within a territory. And
wow, so you're talking about 200,000 to 400,000 humans.
Yeah, exactly right. On average, what we found out in the first 5 or so franchises, it's equivalent to about almost 300,000 population within those 100,000 single-family dwelling units. And we went to great lengths to try to mirror it to exactly how we were operating in Cleveland and Columbus. And I look forward to kind of seeing how this parlays out 3, 4, 5 years for them as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, under 200K all in, is that kind of ballpark?
Yeah, we are. Within that startup cost, we're looking at between $127,000 and $157,000. Part of that difference is just, are they, a lot of the conversion people who have some bit of overhead. It's usually in that $120,000, $127,000 range. If they're starting from scratch, from nothing, it could be a little bit more. But I think the advantage is when you look at the EBITDA that we've generated at our corporate stores. I think you get marketing pretty early. You build that customer base, and you let the good times roll.
Yeah, that's awesome. Appreciate that. And it definitely seems like a lower cost opportunity when you look at the landscape of what's out there. So if anyone listening would like to connect with Rob to discuss Lawn Squad, contact me at franchiseqb.com or on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB. I'll get you connected with Rob and his team at Authority Brands. Thank you, Rob, so much for taking the time to get in the huddle and speak with us about Lawn Squad.
Appreciate the time today. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Franchise QB podcast, where you're at the helm of your future as a franchise owner. If you enjoyed the content, please rate the show and recommend it to anyone that might be interested in franchising. Make sure to visit franchiseqb.com to subscribe to my newsletter and for an actionable playbook to go from walk-on to legend in your new business. Follow us on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB and join us every week for a new episode. See you next time.
Visit franchiseqb.com to take the next step of your journey towards wealth, independence, and franchise ownership. And remember, when working for the man gets old, you must do something bold. Thank you for listening.